Chapter 1. The Echoes of War. Captain Elias Mercer adjusted his helmet and scanned the bleak, windswept plains of the moon. The cold bit through his suit as he stepped forward, his boots leaving faint impressions in the dusty ground. He could still feel the vibrations from the last battle, an echo of destruction that had long since settled into silence. Somewhere ahead, half buried under the broken surface, lay what they'd come for, a relic of an ancient war, now pulsing faintly with a warning hum. "Looks like a graveyard," murmured Lieutenant Alina Reyes, standing a few feet behind him. Her voice, though muffled through the comms, held a note of awe. "How long do you think this place has been dead?" "Long enough for the galaxy to forget," Elias replied, his voice low and steady. He was no stranger to ruins, nor to what they often concealed. But apparently, not long enough for the past to stay buried. They moved forward cautiously, weaving between the skeletal remains of what had once been buildings, now jagged stone spires, jutting out of the moon's surface like broken teeth. Elias kept his eyes on the darkened sky above them. The coalition had warned that another faction might be on their trail, and he wasn't about to take any chances. Alina knelt by a cracked pillar, her gloved fingers brushing against a line of alien script carved into the stone. "Look at this," she said, pointing. "It's like a warning, or maybe a ritual." Elias glanced down, frowning. He didn't recognize the language, but he knew enough about old battlefields to understand that messages left behind rarely meant anything good. "Let's not get too friendly with the decor," he muttered. "We're here for the weapon, not the history lesson." But Alina shook her head. "Captain, if we don't understand what happened here, how do we know we're not walking into the same fate? Maybe this isn't just a relic. Maybe it's—" She stopped abruptly, her gaze lifting as a low rumble echoed across the plains. Elias's pulse quickened. That wasn't the distant memory of explosions, nor the moaning wind. It was coming from beneath them, a slow, rhythmic pulse like a giant heartbeat. "Move back," he ordered, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the pillar. They backed up, watching as cracks spread across the ground in front of them, radiating outward like veins. Elias drew his sidearm, instinctively raising it as a deep blue light began to seep from the fissures in the stone. The hum grew louder, vibrating through their suits and rattling their teeth. What is this thing?" Alina whispered, her eyes wide. She'd seen combat, survived battles that had broken lesser soldiers, but there was something about this ancient relic that shook her in a way the battlefield never had. An old weapon, left by a civilization that knew it wouldn't survive, Elias replied grimly. "It's been dormant for a long time, but something stirred it up." They took another step back, but just as they did, the ground shook violently, sending a cloud of dust swirling around them. A massive stone door, hidden in the shadows of a nearby cliff, ground open. From the dark maw, a sliver of metallic machinery glinted, rising slowly as if waking from a centuries-long slumber. Symbols pulsed across its surface, faintly glowing in rhythmic patterns. Alina's voice crackled in the comm. "Captain, this thing is broadcasting. It's sending a signal. We've been detected." Elias cursed under his breath. "Of course it is. This isn't just a weapon. It's a beacon. And if anyone's out there listening, they'll know we're here." He glanced at Alina, whose gaze was fixed on the massive, alien machine. She was bracing herself, her gloved hand gripping her weapon tightly. Despite her resolve, he could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "You said you wanted to understand this place," he said softly. "Well, now's your chance." The ground rumbled again, and Elias felt the heat emanating from the machine's core. For a moment, he allowed himself a brief flash of anger. He'd come to this forsaken moon to secure the weapon, not to engage with ancient threats. But now, there was no turning back. If the signal had gone out, they'd drawn attention from allies, enemies, and anyone else who might have an interest in the forgotten relic. "Captain, we're not alone," Alina whispered, her voice tense. She was looking past the machine, into the distance. There, silhouetted against the pale horizon, a group of figures was emerging. Humanoid but unmistakably alien, their movements precise and calculated as they approached. Elias's jaw clenched. Looks like our friends found us faster than we thought. The alien team advanced, weapons drawn, and trained on Elias and Alina. There were 5 of them, each wearing sleek, silver armor marked with symbols he recognized from coalition briefings. A rival faction, merciless in combat, and even less forgiving in negotiations. The leader of the alien team raised a hand, signaling the others to halt. In a guttural, heavily accented voice, it called out, "Human trespassers. This relic belongs to the Federation. Surrender or face elimination." Elias took a deep breath, considering his options. They were outnumbered, with no immediate backup and a weapon they barely understood. But retreat wasn't an option. He glanced at Alina, who nodded, determination hardening her gaze. She was ready to fight, ready to stand beside him even against impossible odds. Raising his weapon, he called back, "We're not leaving. And neither are you. Not if we can help it." The alien leader's response was a predatory smile, and it lifted its weapon, pointing it directly at him. The last trace of hesitation vanished from Elias's mind, replaced by the cold clarity of survival. Whatever this place had once been, a fortress, a monument, a grave, it was now their battleground. As the first shots fired and the weapon behind them pulsed with renewed life, Elias felt the tension snap. He'd spent his life fighting against the galaxy's darkest threats. But here, on a forgotten moon, surrounded by enemies and allies alike, he sensed that this was only the beginning. To be continued. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The tension was thick as Elias and Alina took defensive positions behind the crumbled stone barrier, their weapons trained on the approaching alien squad. The air was heavy with the electric hum of the alien weapon behind them, still pulsing with energy, and the scent of dust and charred metal lingered in the cold, thin atmosphere. "Captain," Alina whispered, glancing over at him, her eyes sharp and focused. "What's the play here? We're outnumbered, outgunned, and I'm guessing they're not here to negotiate." Elias scanned the alien squad, recognizing the sleek, metallic armor and insignias they bore. These were Federation soldiers, known for their ruthless efficiency and disdain for humanity's primitive approach to warfare. He tightened his grip on his weapon, eyes narrowed. "Stall them. If they get close enough to that relic, we're done." He took a deep breath, then called out, "You've entered coalition territory. Turn back, or face the consequences." The Federation leader, a towering figure with cobalt blue armor and gleaming silver eyes, responded with a low, guttural laugh. "You think your alliance has authority here, human? This relic belongs to the Federation. Surrender it now, and we may spare your lives." Elias bit back his frustration. Diplomacy with Federation soldiers was like negotiating with a loaded cannon. They only understood power. But he had no other options, and buying time was his only chance. He motioned to Alina to keep her weapon raised, then stepped out from behind the barrier, hands raised to show he wasn't preparing to fire. "Listen," Elias said, his tone hard, "we both know the Coalition isn't going to stand for this. You crossed this line, and you're starting a war." The Federation leader's smile faded, replaced by a sneer. "A war? Humanity thinks itself so mighty, so necessary. But we see through your facade. You cling to alliances, to treaties, only because you lack the strength to stand alone." Alina shifted her stance, her fingers twitching on the trigger as her eyes darted to Elias, silently asking if it was time to fight. He shook his head slightly. Not yet. Instead, he focused on the leader, letting his voice cut through the cold. "You think we're weak because we fight with allies?" He paused, his expression darkening. "We've survived wars, devastations that would have left your kind in ruins. We don't fight to prove power. We fight because we know what's at stake. That's why we'll be the last one standing." The alien leader looked momentarily taken aback, but his composure returned quickly. "Then you're a fool," he hissed. "Allies will abandon you. Power is the only truth." Before Elias could reply, his communicator crackled to life. A familiar voice cut through the static. "Captain Mercer, this is Captain Vrax of the Coalition vessel Torkesh. We're receiving a signal from your location. What's your status?" Elias's jaw clenched. Vrax, one of their Coalition allies, and a captain known for his own mistrust of humanity. But right now, any ally was a lifeline. He brought his calm close to his lips, his gaze still fixed on the alien leader. Vrax were facing Federation soldiers. They're claiming the relic. The silence from Vrax was tense. Then, with a barely concealed growl, Vrax replied, "Understood. Reinforcements en route. Hold your ground." Elias glanced at Alina, nodding slightly. "Looks like we've got backup on the way," he murmured. "Just need to keep them occupied." The Federation leader must have overheard, because he stepped forward, weapon raised. "Your reinforcements mean nothing. This is our claim. And if you're foolish enough to stand in our way, then you die here." A second later, the standoff exploded into action. The Federation soldiers opened fire, and Elias dove back behind the stone barrier, feeling the shockwave of energy blast thundering against the ancient stone. Alina returned fire, her shots clean and precise, but the enemy was advancing relentlessly. Elias reloaded, his mind racing. They had little cover and fewer options. "Alina, focus on the leader. If we can disrupt their chain of command, we might have a shot." Alina nodded, shifting her aim. Her shot struck near the leader's feet, forcing him to halt and retreat behind one of his own soldiers. But as Elias glanced at her, he noticed something. Alina's gaze had flickered to the weapon behind them, the ancient relic, still humming with energy. "Captain, what if we use it?" she asked, voice taut with urgency. "If we can trigger the weapon, we might just push them back." Elias hesitated. The idea was reckless, but he couldn't deny the logic. The weapon was old, unpredictable, but it was clearly still active, and it might be their only chance. He considered it for a second, then nodded. "Do it, but be careful." While Alina sprinted toward the relic, Elias unleashed a hail of cover fire, forcing the Federation soldiers back. Each blast he sent toward them echoed with a fierce resolve. He'd been in fights where hope was a luxury, and he'd learned that sometimes sheer will had to make up for strategy. Alina reached the weapon, her fingers gliding over its surface, searching for any hint of a control interface. Strange symbols began to glow under her touch, shifting and rearranging, almost as if the weapon recognized her presence. "Captain, I think it's responding, but I don't know if I can control it," she called out, her voice strained. Elias fired another round, glancing back at her. "Just get it pointed at them. We don't need perfection, just enough to make them think twice." As she continued working, the humming grew louder, building into a low roar. The Federation soldiers took notice, and their leader barked an order. "They're activating the weapon. Fall back." For the first time, Elias saw fear in the alien's eyes. He allowed himself a grim smile. "Not so eager to fight when the odds aren't in your favor, are you?" Alina shouted, "Captain, it's ready." "Now," he commanded. She pressed down, and a blinding beam of light shot from the relic, cutting across the landscape. The Federation soldiers scrambled for cover as the energy wave struck, sending shards of rock and dust flying. The blast wasn't powerful enough to destroy them, but it sent a clear message. As the dust settled, Elias and Alina stood side by side, breathing heavily as the alien squad retreated. Over the comm, Vrax's voice crackled, barely masking his amazement. "Impressive, Captain Mercer. It seems humanity has a few tricks of its own." Elias holstered his weapon, looking over at Alina with a nod of respect. "Good work, Lieutenant. Remind me never to underestimate you." Alina managed a breathless smile, eyes still wide with adrenaline. "And here I thought you'd learned that lesson already." Together, they watched the retreating Federation soldiers disappear into the distance, the relic still humming behind them like a silent guardian. But the battle wasn't over, and they both knew it. This was only the beginning. To be continued, Chapter 3, Into the Heart of the Enemy. Elias and Alina moved cautiously through the darkened corridors of the Federation outpost. After their encounter at the relic, they had tracked the Federation soldiers to this remote facility, buried within a rocky canyon where the thin mist hung like a shroud, muffling their every step. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of machinery pulsing through the walls. "Captain," Alina murmured, glancing around. "Are we sure this is worth the risk? If they catch us here?" Elias glanced back, his expression set in determination. This is our only shot, Alina. We've spent years trying to understand why the Federation has such an interest in our world and our history. That relic they were after, it's connected to something bigger. We need answers, and they're in here. Alina nodded, but her expression remained tense. They both knew the stakes. If the Federation's suspicions were right, and they discovered what humanity had been hiding, it could spell the end of any coalition alliances. More than that, it could mean extinction. They pressed on, keeping low as they approached a thick, metal door marked with a glyph neither recognized. It pulsed faintly, casting a blue glow over their faces. Elias pressed his ear against it, listening for any sound of movement beyond. "Nothing," he whispered. "Let's hope it's clear." He nodded for Alina to take position. She keyed in her datapad, running a quick scan. The datapad screen flickered and then gave a soft green glow. "It's just a storage room, according to their system. Anyway," Elias stepped forward and keyed in a sequence he had picked up from their previous engagements, hoping the Universal Federation code would override the lock. The door slid open with a faint hiss, and they slipped inside. Inside, the room was vast but sparse, lined with shelves holding metallic cases and alien artifacts. The walls were covered in symbols and unfamiliar glyphs that shimmered with an eerie light. Elias felt his pulse quicken as he realized these were artifacts like the one they'd encountered before, pieces of ancient technology that seemed to predate the Federation's known history. "Captain, look at this," Alina whispered, drawing his attention to a holographic map hovering above a console. The map showed dozens of points scattered across various galaxies, all marked with the same glyph as the relic. Elias frowned, his mind racing. "These are coordinates. All of them lead to locations like the one we found. If the Federation has been tracking these sites..." Alina's eyes widened as she took it in. "They're looking for something. Something they think we have." Her voice was tinged with fear, but she set her jaw, forcing herself to remain focused. Elias moved to the console, scrolling through the data files. Images of relics, some larger than ships, filled the screen, and each one was accompanied by data on energy emissions, frequencies, and biological markers that all shared one chilling commonality: a faint but unmistakable trace of human DNA. "Captain, they think we're tied to these artifacts," Alina murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "They think humanity is connected to whatever these things are." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. The implications were staggering. If these relics were somehow connected to humanity's origins, it could upend everything they knew about their place in the galaxy, and perhaps explain why the Federation saw them as a threat. Before he could reply, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Alina's eyes flashed to him, her hand instinctively tightening on her weapon. "We're out of time," she whispered. "Hide," Elias ordered, ducking behind a stack of crates. Alina mirrored his movement, her breathing shallow but steady as they listened to the approaching voices. 2 Federation officers entered the room, their voices low but clear. Another relic was activated on Sector 34. "They say the humans were there," one of them muttered, irritation coloring his tone. The other officer sighed. "It's only a matter of time before they realize the truth. We can't keep these sites hidden forever. The Council will have to make a move soon." The first officer scoffed. "The Council is afraid. They know the humans are more dangerous than they pretend. Their very existence disrupts the galaxy's balance. If we confirm their link to these relics, well, you know what that will mean?" Elias clenched his fists, biting back anger. They were talking about humanity as though it were a contagion, something to be eradicated. Alina met his gaze, her expression hardened. She'd heard it too, and she wasn't about to stand for it. As the officers left, Elias motioned for Alina to follow him out. Once they were safely back in the corridor, he turned to her. "This is bigger than we thought. We need to get this data back to command. They have to know what the Federation's planning." They navigated through the dimly lit halls, avoiding patrols and carefully timing their steps. The tension was palpable. Each corner, they turned a potential ambush. Elias's senses were on high alert, every sound amplified by the silence surrounding them. Finally, they reached the exit, only to find it blocked by 2 heavily armored guards. Elias cursed under his breath. They were close to freedom, but these guards were no ordinary sentries. They were enforcers, armed with Federation plasma lances and biometric scanners. "We'll never get past them undetected," Alina whispered, scanning their options. Elias weighed their choices. "If we can create a diversion, we might be able to slip by before they even realize what's happening." Alina nodded, her eyes darting around until they fell upon a small conduit panel nearby. She grinned. "I could overload the power grid from here. It'd take out the lights, alarms, maybe even fry a few of their systems." "Do it," Elias said, positioning himself closer to the guards as Alina got to work. Within moments, the lights dimmed, then surged with an electric hum before plunging the corridor into darkness. Taking advantage of the chaos, Elias crept forward, motioning Alina to follow. The guards were disoriented, fumbling with their scanners as they tried to restore order. In the confusion, Elias and Alina slipped past, their footsteps silent against the metal floor. As they reached the outer edge of the outpost, a siren blared, echoing off the canyon walls. Alina looked back, worry etched on her face. "They know we're here. We got to move." They sprinted into the open air, the chill of the canyon sharp against their faces. Overhead, the hum of an approaching Federation patrol ship broke the silence. Elias's comm crackled with static before Vrax's voice cut through. "Captain Mercer, we're closing in on your location. Brace for extraction." They ducked behind a rocky outcrop, watching as the Federation ship descended, its lights scanning the terrain. Alina glanced at Elias, her expression a mix of relief and defiance. "We did it, Captain. We got what we needed." Elias nodded, a fierce resolve in his eyes. "And now we make them understand. They want to know why humanity is dangerous? Let's show them." Chapter 4. The battle begins. The shuttle rocked violently as Vrax maneuvered it through Federation anti-aircraft fire, engines whirring in protest. Elias braced himself, gripping his harness as the vessel swerved to avoid a missile that shot past their hull. The red glow of the enemy's energy beams filled the cabin as they neared their extraction point. "Captain, it's going to get worse before it gets better." Vrax's voice crackled over the comms, his usual steady tone tight with urgency. "Just keep her steady, Vrax. We're almost through," Elias replied, his eyes meeting Alina's across the cabin. She was pale but determined, her hands steady on the rifle she cradled in her lap. Through the small porthole, Elias could see the Federation's central outpost in the distance, a sprawling fortress surrounded by turrets and plasma cannons. Inside that outpost, hidden in encrypted data cores, were the records they needed, irrefutable evidence of the Federation's long-hidden fear of humanity and the connection between Earth and the ancient relics scattered across the stars. Vrax's voice cut in again. "Prepare for landing. We're coming in hot, and I won't be able to hold position for long." Elias unbuckled his harness and nodded to Alina. "Let's make this quick. Get in, extract the data, and get out before they have a chance to regroup." The shuttle landed with a harsh jolt, and the hatch hissed open, spilling Elias and Alina into the dust and chaos of the Federation's base perimeter. Alina's sharp gaze took in their surroundings, scanning for threats. "Left side clear, Captain." Moving to the entry point, they sprinted to a side door, shielded from view by an overhang of twisted metal and rock. Elias keyed in the code he'd extracted from the intel earlier, praying it still worked. With a beep and a click, the door slid open, revealing a narrow corridor lit by the blue glow of emergency lights. Inside, the base hummed with the tension of alert status. Footsteps and urgent voices echoed down the hallways as Federation soldiers scrambled to secure positions and respond to the shuttle's arrival. Elias and Alina pressed themselves against the wall, waiting as a group of armed guards rushed past. As the voices faded, Elias motioned Alina forward. "This way," he whispered, leading her down a series of narrow passages to the central data core chamber. The silence thickened as they approached, broken only by the faint hum of machinery. They reached the chamber, and Elias scanned the area quickly. A lone technician stood at a console, oblivious to their presence. Alina raised her rifle, but Elias motioned for her to lower it. Let's do this quietly. Moving like a shadow, he approached the technician, wrapping an arm around his neck in a choke hold until he went limp. Alina began typing into the console, her fingers dancing over the keys as she hacked into the core. "I've got access to the files," she whispered, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "But there's more here than we expected. They've been watching us for decades, monitoring our history, our evolution, even our genetics. They think we're a missing piece." Elias clenched his jaw, staring at the files as they loaded onto Alina's datapad. The Federation's fear wasn't based on their military strength. It was something deeper, something fundamental. To the Federation, humanity was a wild card, an unpredictable variable in a galaxy where control meant survival. Suddenly, an alarm blared, and red lights flashed throughout the chamber. "They've detected the data breach. We need to get out now," Elias commanded, glancing at Alina, who tucked the datapad securely into her gear. They raced back down the corridor, but as they reached the exit, a squad of Federation soldiers blocked their path. The lead officer, a tall figure with cold, calculating eyes, raised his weapon, aiming directly at Elias. "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." Elias held his ground, meeting the officer's gaze with defiance. "You fear us because you know we're more than you can control. All these years, you've tried to keep us contained to study us from a distance. But now, you're facing us head-on." The officer sneered, but his grip on his weapon tightened. "We know what you're capable of. We won't let you disrupt the balance we've maintained for centuries." Alina's fingers brushed a hidden button on her wrist, signaling Vrax. Seconds later, the distant hum of engines filled the air as their shuttle descended, unleashing a volley of suppressive fire on the Federation squad. In the chaos, Elias and Alina darted for cover, firing back at their pursuers with precision and speed honed by years of combat. "Vrax, we need an extraction point now." Elias barked into his comm, ducking behind a fallen beam as plasma bolts scorched the air above. "I'm opening the main hatch," Vrax replied. "Get to the clearing on the south side. I'll cover you as best I can, but you'll need to move fast." Alina nodded, her eyes focused and determined. "I'll take point. Keep them off my back, Captain." They sprinted toward the clearing, weaving between cover as Federation soldiers closed in from all sides. The scent of scorched metal and plasma filled Elias's senses, and his muscles burned as he pushed forward, staying close to Alina. At last, they reached the clearing, where Vrax hovered above, lowering the shuttle's ramp. Elias fired a final shot at the Federation squad as he and Alina scrambled aboard, collapsing on the floor as the hatch sealed behind them. As they lifted off, Elias turned to Alina, who clutched the datapad containing their prize. "We did it. They'll never be able to hide the truth from us again." Alina gave a weary smile, her face smudged with dust and streaked with sweat. "Now, they'll see us for what we really are. Not a threat to be feared, but a force to be reckoned with." Vrax glanced back from the pilot's seat, his eyes reflecting the glow of the stars as they broke through the planet's atmosphere. "So, what's our next move, Captain?" Elias met his gaze, his expression set with resolve. "We take this to the Coalition. We show them the Federation's deception, their fear of what we might become. And then we prepare." Vrax grinned, nodding as he throttled the engines to full speed, propelling them into the vast expanse of space. The stars stretched before them, a sea of possibilities and unknowns. But for the first time, Elias felt the thrill of freedom, unburdened by the shadow of Federation control. As they vanished into the darkness, Elias knew that humanity's journey was only beginning. And whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, unbreakable, undaunted, and ready to claim their place among the stars.